While the price of video games themselves may be oddly going down, $50 seems to be a common price point for even the most tentpole of pre-orders, the price of video game hardware might be going up, and substantially so, which is frightening, and it's all due to new tariffs. But have no fear, Nintendo is fighting back for you, and they're fighting back with the greatest trio that they could possibly assemble.
Zach, if you think back to the dawn of this channel when we first started it, if I had told you that we were going to make a video about tariffs one day, would you have believed me?
That's the world where the Switch completely failed and we had to become a financial advice channel.
We'd be the worst at that, so I'm
yeah,
very
happy. We would fail that as well, so
yeah.
thank goodness Switch succeeded. And hopefully it can continue to succeed. And one thing that might get in our wallet's way is these new tariffs. And in a really cool coming together moment, as they've done lately, Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony are working together to try and fight against this and try to preserve the MSRP that we know and that we've come to kind of expect. They say that if these go through, the price could substantially increase. So the general counsel for each of the big three wrote a letter together cooperatively, playing some co-op. 3-player co-op, as you know, is very popular based on E3.
Yes.
And they said this in their letter. While we appreciate the administration's efforts to protect U.S. intellectual property and preserve U.S. high-tech leadership, the disproportionate harm caused by these tariffs to U.S. consumers and businesses will undermine, not advance, these goals. Accordingly, we respectfully request that the administration remove HTSUS subheading 9504.50.00 covering video game consoles from the final list of tariffs, and thus refrain from applying tariffs on these products.
Now, I really hope this ends up happening. Just a little background information to consoles in general. They are usually sold at a loss. Not so much anymore. Yeah, early on.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore because the PS4 and Xbox are both towards the end of their life cycle, so they're not being sold at a loss. And traditional Nintendo just doesn't sell consoles at a loss either. So this would honestly just hurt the consumer because none of those companies are going to swallow that, especially not Nintendo.
Well, especially given that in a new gen, which PS5 and Scarlet are on their way, they do have to eat a bit of it. And this, what they describe as a substantial hike, they couldn't. They wouldn't be able to. And that would be passed along to the consumer in a notable way.
Yeah, so, and that's, I guess, the important part, right? Because it wouldn't have too much of an effect on what we have going on now. If this were to come to pass.
Yeah,
as far as we think, just based off whatever information we know. But for the new stuff, Scarlet, PS5, Switch Mini, Switch Pro, anything that happens, hypothetically, all of those would be way more expensive if this does end up being the case. We've seen that Nintendo has even shifted some of their manufacturing. They're moving out of China, going to Southeast Asia in order to avoid some of this tariff stuff.
Right, it's a preventative move.
Yeah, but I mean, this makes me wonder though, if they are just saying, hey, please, whitelist us so it doesn't happen. Do they want to go back because it's just cheaper? I mean, I don't know all the background information there. It's a lot of very granular business stuff that we don't think about as far as just being consumers.
Right. Well, and they note that it would impact not only companies that manufacture their stuff, their video game stuff in Japan, but it would also affect the American development industry because if consoles are more expensive, there's less out there, which means there's less people to play the games, which means the development of games isn't as profitable either. It could have ripple effects that would potentially really impact, and they want to make sure that doesn't happen. So they are fighting for you, they're fighting for us, they're trying to keep this under control. And I think even though they're not taking a loss right now, if you look, say, 2 years down the road and they're still producing Switch, maybe they're still producing PS4 Pros, if these are to pass, these tariffs are applied to the consoles, it would impact that. And maybe then it becomes a dicier proposition of getting price drops or where they need to go. But in particular, anything new. And Gabe's right, we have seen Nintendo has shifted to Southeast Asia. Microsoft and Sony have expressed that they're worried about the viability of producing in China, and if they're going to have to move or they're going to have to make a significant change as they prep and rev up production for these new consoles. So it's really good to see that they are working together, one, and two, trying to really push back against this. Now, we have no way of knowing if it'll go through or where the U.S. government stands in terms of how willing they are to budge, but it's a bit nerve-wracking to think, how much is a PS5 going to cost, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, a Switch Mini is going to be a cheaper console. Now it's how much cheaper, but if you're looking on that other end, either the Pro or the PS5, does a $600 console become a $650 console, become a $700 console? We saw Pactor predict around E3, PS5 is going to be pricey.
Yeah, I mean, there's rumors about the price for Scarlet just because internally PS5 and Scarlet are absolutely insane. If you would have told me to predict what the next gen consoles were, like what they're doing, like seriously, like how are they doing it?
Super impressive.
So you got to figure it's going to be a little expensive. One other thing I wanted to mention, Zach, is fans, we have them all over the world, and unfortunately this already impacts a lot of other countries where video games are just like so much more expensive and consoles are so much more expensive, and we see it a lot on the sales videos we make where they're like, oh, you guys are lucky that you see things like this because over here we gotta pay a ton for them. And I sympathize with those fans, and to think that we potentially here could be one of those countries, it's sad because video games are already an expensive hobby in general, right? Like if you want to like keep up with everything, the console expensive, probably a nice TV and games themselves, although yes, getting cheaper apparently are also expensive. So yeah, I really would hate to see this come to pass.
I think it's at the most inopportune of times, right? It's like a perfect storm of when this might go down because everyone is prepping something new. Right, and that makes it way more difficult. If it's like, oh, we still got 3 years left in the gen, like, yeah, it's frustrating, but we'll figure it out. Like, they are, and Microsoft and Sony in particular, are ready to throw all of their might, all of their hopes behind what's next. And if what's next all of a sudden takes a price hike that they weren't expecting, now you are removing the opportunity for certain people to purchase. You're removing game sales, right? If they have to dip $50 more into their pocketbooks for the console, it just becomes bad. Personally, I'm okay with the price of video game hardware as it is currently. I know some people would love the Switch to be cheaper than $300, but deep in the life cycle, getting a PS4 for $200 seems cool to me, and inevitably the Switch Mini will be cheaper than $300, and people hope that gets down to like $199 or around there, and eventually the Switch sees a price drop. Even for Nintendo, it's super important that these tariffs do not affect the console so that we are able to, one, keep those prices, and two, continue to see a decrease in MSRP, whether it's via price drops for the current Switch or a smaller, cheaper, more handheld product.
Zach, we don't usually see the big three come together like this. We've seen it a lot more recently, but hopefully seeing three giant companies like this come together in order to try to make this happen moves the right wheels somewhere so that consoles are whitelisted so that we here are not affected. Again, other countries unfortunately already have things similar to this, but we've never had anything like this, and hopefully the right people are listening and this does end up happening.
Yeah, the most powerful instruction booklet ever has been submitted, a 7-page booklet from Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. Let us know how you feel about these potential hardware tariffs in the comments down below. And if you're happy that Nintendo is fighting back for you and trying to keep these prices down alongside some cool dudes and dudettes at Sony and Microsoft, give us your take in those comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and want console prices to stay where they are or maybe even go down. And until next time, everybody, for myself and Gabe, we'll keep you posted if anything changes or they get a final verdict. For now, though, thanks again. SwitchForce out.